Chapter 9 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Emma Charlotte. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. Jack the Giant Killer, Part 2. 4. Now it so happened that in those days when gallant knights were always seeking adventures, King Arthur's only son, a very valiant prince, begged of his father a large sum of money to enable him to journey to Wales, and there strive to set free a certain beautiful lady, who was possessed by 7 evil spirits. In vain the King denied him. So at last he gave way, and the Prince set out with 2 horses, one of which he rode, and the other laden with gold pieces. Now after some days' journey the Prince came to a market town in Wales where there was a great commotion. On asking the reason for it he was told that, according to law, the corpse of a very generous man had been arrested on its way to the grave, because, in life, it had owed large sums to the money-lenders. "That is a cruel law," said the young Prince. "Go bury the dead in peace, and let the creditors come to my lodgings. I will pay the debts of the dead." So the creditors came, but they were so numerous that by evening the Prince had but 2 pence left for himself, and could not go further on his journey. Now it so happened that Jack the Giant Killer on his way to Wales passed through the town, and, hearing of the Prince's plight, was so taken with his kindness and generosity that he determined to be the Prince's servant. So this was agreed upon, and next morning, after Jack had paid the reckoning with his last farthing, the 2 set out together. But as they were leaving the town, an old woman ran after the Prince and called out, "Justice, justice! The dead man owed me 2 pence these 7 years. Pay me as well as the others." And the Prince, kind and generous, put his hand to his pocket and gave the old woman the 2 pence that was left to him. So now they had not a penny between them, and when the sun grew low the Prince said, "Jack, since we have no money, how are we to get a night's lodging?" Then Jack replied, "We shall do well enough, master, for within 2 or 3 miles of this place there lives a huge and monstrous giant with 3 heads, who can fight 400 men in armour and make them fly from him like chaff before the wind." "And what good will that do to us?" quoth the Prince. "He will for sure chop us up in a mouthful." "Nay," said Jack, laughing, "let me go and prepare the way for you. By all accounts this giant is a dolt. Mayhap I may manage better than that." So the Prince remained where he was, and Jack pricked his steed at full speed till he came to the giant's castle, at the gate of which he knocked so loud that he made the neighbouring hills resound. On this the giant roared from within in a voice like thunder, "Who's there?" Then said Jack as bold as brass, "None but your poor cousin Jack." "Cousin Jack?" quoth the giant astounded, "and what news with my poor cousin Jack?" For, see you, he was quite taken aback. So Jack made haste to reassure him. "Dear coz, heavy news, God wot." "Heavy news!" echoed the giant, half afraid. "God wot no heavy news can come to me. Have I not 3 heads? Can I not fight 500 men in armour? Can I not make them fly like chaff before the wind?" "True," replied crafty Jack, "but I came to warn you because the great King Arthur's son with 1,000 men in armour is on his way to kill you." At this the giant began to shiver and to shake. "Ah, cousin Jack, kind cousin Jack, this is heavy news indeed," quoth he. "Tell me, what am I to do?" "Hide yourself in the vault," says crafty Jack, "and I will lock and bolt and bar you in, and keep the key till the Prince has gone, so you will be safe." Then the giant made haste and ran down into the vault, and Jack locked and bolted and barred him in. Then being thus secure, he went and fetched his master, and the two made themselves heartily merry over what the giant was to have had for supper, while the miserable monster shivered and shook with fright in the underground vault. Well, after a good night's rest, Jack woke his master in early morn, and having furnished him well with gold and silver from the giant's treasure, bade him ride 3 miles forward on his journey. So when Jack judged that the Prince was pretty well out of the smell of the giant, he took the key and let his prisoner out. He was half dead with cold and damp, but very grateful, and he begged Jack to let him know what he would be given as a reward for saving the giant's life and castle from destruction, and he should have it. "You're very welcome," said Jack, who always had his eyes about him. "All I want is the old coat and cap, together with the rusty old sword and slippers which are at your bed head." When the giant heard this he sighed and shook his head. "You don't know what you are asking," quoth he. "They are the most precious things I possess, but as I have promised, you must have them. The coat will make you invisible, the cap will tell you all you want to know, the sword will cut asunder whatever you strike, and the slippers will take you wherever you want to go in the twinkling of an eye." So Jack, overjoyed, rode away with the coat and cap, the sword and the slippers, and soon overtook his master, and they rode on together until they reached the castle where the beautiful lady lived whom the Prince sought. Now she was very beautiful, for all she was possessed of 7 devils, and when she heard the Prince sought her as a suitor, she smiled and ordered a splendid banquet to be prepared for his reception, and she sate on his right hand and plied him with food and drink. And when the repast was over she took out her own handkerchief and wiped his lips gently, and said with a smile, "I have a task for you, my lord. You must show me that kerchief to-morrow morning or lose your head." And with that she put the handkerchief in her bosom and said, "Good night." The Prince was in despair, but Jack said nothing till his master was in bed. Then he put on the old cap he had got from the giant, and lo! in a minute he knew all that he wanted to know. So, in the dead of the night, when the beautiful lady called on one of her familiar spirits to carry her to Lucifer himself, Jack was beforehand with her, and putting on his coat of darkness and his slippers of swiftness, was there as soon as she was. And when she gave the handkerchief to the devil, bidding him keep it safe, and he put it away on a high shelf, Jack just up and nipped it away in a trice. So the next morning when the beauteous enchanted lady looked to see the Prince crestfallen, he just made a fine bow and presented her with the handkerchief. At first she was terribly disappointed, but as the day drew on, she ordered another and still more splendid repast to be got ready. And this time when the repast was over, she kissed the Prince full on the lips and said, "I have a task for you, my lover. Show me to-morrow morning the last lips I kiss to-night, or you lose your head." Then the Prince, who by this time was head over ears in love, said tenderly, "If you will kiss none but mine, I will." Now the beauteous lady, for all she was possessed by 7 devils, could not but see the Prince was a very handsome young man. So she blushed a little and said, "That is neither here nor there. You must show me them, or death is your portion." So the Prince went to his bed sorrowful as before. But Jack put on the cap of knowledge and knew in a moment all he wanted to know. Thus when, in the dead of the night, the beauteous lady called on her familiar spirit to take her to Lucifer himself, Jack, in his coat of darkness and his shoes of swiftness, was there before her. "Thou hast betrayed me once," said the beauteous lady to Lucifer, frowning, "by letting go my handkerchief. Now I will give thee something none can steal, and so best the Prince, King's son though he be." With that she kissed the loathly demon full on the lips, and left him. Whereupon Jack with one blow of the rusty sword of strength cut off Lucifer's head, and hiding it under his coat of darkness, brought it back to his master. Thus next morning when the beauteous lady, with malice in her beautiful eyes, asked the Prince to show her the lips she had just kissed, he pulled out the demon's head by the horns. On that the 7 devils, which possessed the poor lady, gave 7 dreadful shrieks and left her. Thus the enchantment being broken, she appeared in all her perfect beauty and goodness. So she and the Prince were married the very next morning, after which they journeyed back to the court of King Arthur, where Jack the Giant Killer, for his many exploits, was made one of the Knights of the Round Table. 5. This, however, did not satisfy our hero, who was soon on the road again searching for giants. Now he had not gone far when he came upon one, seated on a huge block of timber near the entrance to a dark cave. He was a most terrific giant. His goggle eyes were as coals of fire, his countenance was grim and gruesome. His cheeks, like huge flitches of bacon, were covered with a stubbly beard, the bristles of which resembled rods of iron wire, while the locks of his hair that fell on his brawny shoulders showed like curled snakes or hissing adders. He held a knotted iron club, and breathed so heavily you could hear him a mile away. Nothing daunted by this fearsome sight, Jack alighted from his horse and putting on his coat of darkness, went close up to the giant and said softly, "Hullo, is that you? It will not be long before I have you fast by your beard." So saying he made a cut with the sword of strength at the giant's head, but somehow, missing his aim, cut off the nose instead, clean as a whistle. My goodness, how the giant roared! It was like claps of thunder, and he began to lay about him with the knotted iron club, like one possessed. But Jack, in his coat of darkness, easily dodged the blows, and running in behind, drove the sword up to the hilt into the giant's back, so that he fell stone dead. Jack then cut off the head and sent it to King Arthur by a waggoner whom he hired for the purpose. After which he began to search the giant's cave to find his treasure. He passed through many windings and turnings until he came to a huge hall paved and roofed with freestone. At the upper end of this was an immense fireplace where hung an iron cauldron, the like of which for size Jack had never seen before. It was boiling and gave out a savoury steam, while beside it, on the right hand, stood a big massive table set out with huge platters and mugs. Here it was that the giants used to dine. Going a little further he came upon a sort of window barred with iron, and looking within beheld a vast number of miserable captives. "Alas, alack!" they cried on seeing him. "Art come, young man, to join us in this dreadful prison?" "That depends," quoth Jack, "but first tell me wherefore you are thus held imprisoned." "Through no fault," they cried at once. "We are captives of the cruel giants and are kept here and well nourished until such time as the monsters desire a feast. Then they choose the fattest and sup off them." On hearing this, Jack straightway unlocked the door of the prison and set the poor fellows free. Then, searching the giant's coffers, he divided the gold and silver equally amongst the captives, as some redress for their sufferings, and taking them to a neighbouring castle, gave them a right good feast. 6. Now, as they were all making merry over their deliverance, and praising Jack's prowess, a messenger arrived to say that one Thunderdell, a huge giant with 2 heads, having heard of the death of his kinsman, was on his way from the northern dales to be revenged, and was already within a mile or 2 of the castle. The country folk with their flocks and herds flying before him like chaff before the wind. Now the castle with its garden stood on a small island that was surrounded by a moat 20 feet wide and 30 feet deep, having very steep sides, and this moat was spanned by a drawbridge. This, without a moment's delay, Jack ordered should be sawn on both sides at the middle, so as to leave only one plank uncut, over which he, in his invisible coat of darkness, passed swiftly to meet his enemy, bearing in his hand the wonderful sword of strength. Now, though the giant could not, of course, see Jack, he could smell him, for giants have keen noses. Therefore Thunderdell cried out in a voice like his name, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." "Is that so?" quoth Jack, cheerful as ever. "Then art thou a monstrous miller for sure." On this, the giant, peering round everywhere for a glimpse of his foe, shouted out, "Art thou, indeed, the villain who hath killed so many of my kinsmen? Then, indeed, will I tear thee to pieces with my teeth, suck thy blood, and grind thy bones to powder." "Thou'lt have to catch me first," quoth Jack, laughing, and throwing off his coat of darkness and putting on his slippers of swiftness, he began nimbly to lead the giant a pretty dance, he leaping and doubling light as a feather, the monster following heavily like a walking tower, so that the very foundations of the earth seemed to shake at every step. At this game the onlookers nearly split their sides with laughter, until Jack, judging there had been enough of it, made for the drawbridge, ran neatly over the single plank, and reaching the other side waited in teasing fashion for his adversary. On came the giant at full speed, foaming at the mouth with rage, and flourishing his club. But when he came to the middle of the bridge his great weight, of course, broke the plank, and there he was fallen headlong into the moat, rolling and wallowing like a whale, plunging from place to place, yet unable to get out and be revenged. The spectators greeted his efforts with roars of laughter, and Jack himself was at first too overcome with merriment to do more than scoff. At last, however, he went for a rope, cast it over the giant's 2 heads, so with the help of the team of horses drew them shorewards, where 2 blows from the sword of strength settled the matter. 7. After some time spent in mirth and pastimes, Jack began once more to grow restless, and taking leave of his companions set out for fresh adventures. He travelled far and fast, through woods and vales and hills, till at last he came, late at night, on a lonesome house set at the foot of a high mountain. Knocking at the door, it was opened by an old man whose head was white as snow. "Father," said Jack, ever courteous, "can you lodge a benighted traveller?" "Ay, that will I, and welcome to my poor cottage," replied the old man. Whereupon Jack came in, and after supper they sate together chatting in friendly fashion. Then it was that the old man, seeing by Jack's belt that he was the famous giant killer, spoke in this wise: "My son, you are the great conqueror of evil monsters. Now close by there lives one well worthy of your prowess. On the top of yonder high hill is an enchanted castle kept by a giant named Galligantua, who, by the help of the wicked old magician, inveigles many beautiful ladies and valiant knights into the castle, where they are transformed into all sorts of birds and beasts, yea, even into fishes and insects. There they live pitiably in confinement. But most of all do I grieve for a duke's daughter whom they kidnapped in her father's garden, bringing her hither in a burning chariot drawn by fiery dragons. Her form is that of a white hind, and though many valiant knights have tried their utmost to break the spell and work her deliverance, none have succeeded. For, see you, at the entrance to the castle are two dreadful griffins who destroy every one who attempts to pass them by." Now Jack bethought him of the coat of darkness which had served him so well before, and he put on the cap of knowledge, and in an instant he knew what had to be done. Then the very next morning, at dawn time, Jack arose and put on his invisible coat and his slippers of swiftness. And in the twinkling of an eye there he was on the top of the mountain, and there were the two griffins guarding the castle gates, horrible creatures with forked tails and tongues. But they could not see him because of the coat of darkness, so he passed them by unharmed. And hung to the doors of the gateway he found a golden trumpet on a silver chain, and beneath it was engraved in red lettering: "Whoever shall his trumpet blow Will cause the giant's overthrow. The black enchantment he will break, And gladness out of sadness make." No sooner had Jack read these words than he put the horn to his lips and blew aloud, "Tantivy, tantivy, tantivy." Now at the very first note the castle trembled to its vast foundations, and before he had finished the measure, both the giant and the magician were biting their thumbs and tearing their hair, knowing that their wickedness must now come to an end. But the giant showed fight and took up his club to defend himself, whereupon Jack, with one clean cut of the sword of strength, severed his head from his body, and would doubtless have done the same to the magician, but that the latter was a coward, and calling up a whirlwind was swept away by it into the air, nor has he ever been seen or heard of since. The enchantments being thus broken, all the valiant knights and beautiful ladies who had been transformed into birds and beasts, and fishes and reptiles and insects, returned to their proper shapes, including the Duke's daughter, who, from being a white hind, showed as the most beauteous maiden upon whom the sun ever shone. Now, no sooner had this occurred than the whole castle vanished away in a cloud of smoke, and from that moment giants vanished also from the land. So Jack, when he had presented the head of Galligantua to King Arthur, together with all the lords and ladies he had delivered from enchantment, found he had nothing more to do. As a reward for past services, however, King Arthur bestowed the hand of the Duke's daughter upon honest Jack the Giant Killer. So married they were, and the whole kingdom was filled with joy at their wedding. Furthermore, the King bestowed on Jack a noble castle with a magnificent estate belonging thereto, Whereon he, his lady, and their children lived in great joy and content for the rest of their days. End of Jack the Giant Killer, Part 2.
Chapter 10 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Amy McCracken. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. The Three Sillies. Once upon a time, when folk were not so wise as they are nowadays, there lived a farmer and his wife, who had one daughter. And she, being a pretty lass, was courted by the young squire when he came home from his travels. Now every evening he would stroll over from the hall to see her, and stop to supper in the farmhouse, and every evening the daughter would go down into the cellar to draw the cider for supper. So one evening, when she had gone down to draw the cider, and had turned the tap as usual, she happened to look up at the ceiling, and there she saw a big wooden mallet stuck in one of the beams. It must have been there for ages and ages, for it was all covered with cobwebs, but somehow or another she had never noticed it before, and at once she began thinking how dangerous it was to have the mallet just there. For, thought she, supposing him and me was married, and supposing we was to have a son, and supposing he were to grow up to be a man, and supposing he were to come down to draw cider like as I'm doing, and supposing the mallet were to fall on his head and kill him, how dreadful it would be. And with that she put down the candle she was carrying, and seating herself on a cask, began to cry. And she cried and cried and cried. Now, upstairs, they began to wonder why she was so long drawing the cider. So, after a time, her mother went down to the cellar to see what had come to her, and found her seated on the cask, crying ever so hard, and the cider running all over the floor. "Lawks a mercy me!" cried her mother. "Whatever is the matter?" "Oh, mother," says she between her sobs, "it's that horrid mallet. Supposing him and me was married, and supposing we was to have a son, and supposing he was to grow up to be a man, and supposing he was to come down to draw cider like as I'm doing, and supposing the mallet were to fall on his head and kill him, how dreadful it would be." "Dear heart," said the mother, seating herself beside her daughter and beginning to cry, "how dreadful it would be." So they both sat a-crying. Now, after a time, when they did not come back, the farmer began to wonder what had happened, and going down to the cellar found them seated side by side on the cask, crying hard, and the cider running all over the floor. "Zounds!" said he, "whatever is the matter?" "Just look at that horrid mallet up there, father," moaned the mother. "Supposing our daughter was to marry her sweetheart, and supposing they was to have a son, and supposing he was to grow to man's estate, and supposing he was to come down to draw cider like as we're doing, and supposing that there mallet was to fall on his head and kill him, how dreadful it would be." "Dreadful indeed," said the father, and seating himself beside his wife and daughter, started a-crying too. Now upstairs the young squire wanted his supper, so at last he lost patience, and went down into the cellar to see for himself what they were all after. And there he found them seated side by side on the cask a-crying, with their feet all awash in cider, for the floor was fair flooded. So the first thing he did was to run straight and turn off the tap. Then he said, "What are you three after, sitting there crying like babies, and letting good cider run over the floor?" Then they all three began with one voice, "Look at that horrid mallet! Supposing you and me was married, and supposing we had a son, and supposing he was to grow to man's estate, and supposing he was to come down here to draw cider like as we be, and supposing that there mallet was to fall down on his head and kill him, how dreadful it would be." Then the squire burst out a-laughing, and laughed till he was tired. But at last he reached up to the old mallet and pulled it out, and put it safe on the floor. And he shook his head and said, "I've travelled far and I've travelled fast, but never have I met with three such sillies as you three. Now I can't marry one of the three biggest sillies in the world, so I shall start again on my travels, and if I can find three bigger sillies than you three, then I'll come back and be married, not otherwise." So he wished them good-bye, and started again on his travels, leaving them all crying, this time because the marriage was off. Well, the young man travelled far and he travelled fast, but never did he find a bigger silly, until one day he came upon an old woman's cottage that had some grass growing on the thatched roof. And the old woman was trying her best to cudgel her cow into going up a ladder to eat the grass, but the poor thing was afraid and durst not go. Then the old woman tried coaxing, but it wouldn't go. You never saw such a sight, the cow getting more and more flustered and obstinate, the old woman getting hotter and hotter. At last the young squire said, "It would be easier if you went up the ladder, cut the grass, and threw it down for the cow to eat." "A likely story that," says the old woman. "A cow can cut grass for herself, and the foolish thing will be quite safe up there, for I'll tie a rope round her neck, pass the rope down the chimney, and fasten t'other end to my wrist, so as when I'm doing my bit of washing she can't fall off the roof without my knowing it. So mind your own business, young sir." Well, after a while the old woman coaxed and codgered and bullied and badgered the cow up the ladder, and when she got it on the roof she tied a rope round its neck, passed the rope down the chimney, and fastened t'other end to her wrist. Then she went about her bit of washing, and young squire went on his way. But he hadn't gone but a bit when he heard the awfullest hullabaloo. He galloped back and found that the cow had fallen off the roof and got strangled by the rope round its neck, while the weight of the cow had pulled the old woman by her wrist up the chimney, where she had got stuck half-way and been smothered by the soot. "That is one bigger silly," quoth the young squire as he journeyed on. "So now for two more." He did not find any, however, till late one night he arrived at a little inn, and the inn was so full that he had to share a room with another traveller. Now his room fellow proved quite a pleasant fellow, and they foregathered, and each slept well in his bed. But next morning when they were dressing, what does the stranger do but carefully hang his breeches on the knobs of the tall boy. "What are you doing?" asks young squire. "I'm putting on my breeches," says the stranger. And with that he goes to the other end of the room, takes a little run, and tried to jump into the breeches. But he didn't succeed, so he took another run and another try, and another and another and another, until he got quite hot and flustered, as the old woman had got over her cow that wouldn't go up the ladder. And all the time young squire was laughing fit to split, for never in his life did he see anything so comical. Then the stranger stopped a while and mopped his face with his handkerchief, for he was all in a sweat. "It's very well laughing," says he, "but breeches are the most awkwardest things to get into that ever were. It takes me the best part of an hour every morning before I get them on. How do you manage yours?" Then the young squire showed him, as well as he could for laughing, how to put on his breeches, and the stranger was ever so grateful, and said he never should have thought of that way. "So that," quoth young squire to himself, "is a second bigger silly." But he travelled far and he travelled fast without finding the third, until one bright night when the moon was shining right overhead, he came upon a village, and outside the village was a pond, and round about the pond was a great crowd of villagers, and some had got rakes, and some had got pitchforks, and some had got brooms, and they were as busy, shouting out and raking and forking and sweeping away at the pond. "What is the matter?" cried young squire, jumping off his horse to help. "Has anyone fallen in?" "Aye, matter enough," says they. "Can't 'ee see moon's fallen into the pond, and we can't get her out nohow?" And with that they set to again raking and forking and sweeping away. Then the young squire burst out laughing, told them they were the fools for their pains, and bade them look up over their heads where the moon was riding broad and full. But they wouldn't, and they wouldn't believe that what they saw in the water was only a reflection. And when he insisted, they began to abuse him roundly and threatened to duck him in the pond. So he got on his horse again as quickly as he could, leaving them raking and forking and sweeping away, and for all we know they may be at it yet. But the young squire said to himself, "There are many more sillies in this world than I thought for, so I'll just go back and marry the farmer's daughter. She is no sillier than the rest." So they were married, and if they didn't live happy ever after, that has nothing to do with the story of the Three Sillies. End of The Three Sillies. Recording by Amy McCracken.
Chapter 11 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Betty B. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. The Golden Ball. Once upon a time there lived two lasses who were sisters, and as they came from the fair they saw a right handsome young man standing at a house door before them. They had never seen such a handsome young man before. He had gold on his cap, gold on his finger, gold on his neck, gold at his waist, and he had a golden ball in each hand. He gave a ball to each lass, saying she was to keep it, but if she lost it, she was to be hanged. Now the youngest of the lasses lost her ball, and this is how. She was by a park paling, and she was tossing her ball, and it went up and up and up till it went fair over the paling, and when she climbed to look for it, the ball ran along the green grass, and it ran right forward to the door of a house that stood there, and the ball went into the house, and she saw it no more. So she was taken away to be hanged by the neck till she was dead, because she had lost her ball. But the lass had a sweetheart, and he said he would go and get the ball. So he went to the park gate, but 'twas shut. Then he climbed the railing, and when he got to the top of it, an old woman rose up out of the ditch before him, and said that if he wanted to get the ball, he must sleep 3 nights in the house. So he said he would. Well, when it was evening, he went into the house and looked everywhere for the ball, but he could not find it, nor any one in the house at all. But when night came on, he thought he heard bogles moving about in the courtyard. So he looked out of the window, and sure enough, the yard was full of them. Presently he heard steps coming upstairs, so he hid behind the door and was as still as a mouse. Then in came a big giant, 5 times as tall as the lad, and looked around, but seeing nothing, he went to the window and bowed himself to look out. And as he bowed on his elbows to see the bogles in the yard, the lad stepped behind him, and with one blow of his sword he cut him in twain, so that the top part of him fell in the yard, and the bottom part remained standing looking out of the window. Well, there was a great cry from the bogles when they saw half the giant come tumbling down to them, and they called out, "There comes half our master! Give us the other half!" Then the lad said, "It's no use of thee, thou pair of legs, standing alone at the window, as thou hast no eye to see with, so go join thy brother." And he cast the lower part of the giant after the top part. Now when the bogles had gotten all the giant, they were quiet. Next night the lad went to sleep in the house again, and this time a second giant came in at the door, and as he came in the lad cut him in twain, but the legs walked on to the fire and went straight up the chimney. "Go, get thee after thy legs," said the lad to the head, and he cast the other half of the giant up the chimney. Now the third night nothing happened, so the lad got into bed, but before he went to sleep he heard the bogles striving under the bed, and he wondered what they were at. So he peeped and saw that they had the ball there, and were playing with it, casting it to and fro. Now after a time one of them thrust his leg out from under the bed, and quick as anything the lad brings his sword down and cuts it off. Then another bogle thrust his arm out at the other side of the bed, and in a twinkling the lad cuts that off too. So it went on, till at last he had maimed them all, and they all went off, crying and wailing, and forgot the ball. Then the lad got out of bed, found the ball, and went off at once to seek his true love. Now the lass had been taken to York to be hanged. She was brought out on the scaffold, and the hangman said, "Now, lass, thou must hang by the neck till thou beest dead." But she cried out, "Stop, stop, I think I see my mother coming. Oh, mother, hast thou brought my golden ball and come to set me free?" And the mother answered, "I've neither brought thy golden ball nor come to set thee free, but I have come to see thee hung upon this gallows tree." Then the hangman said, "Now, lass, say thy prayers, for thou must die." But she said, "Stop, stop, I think I see my father coming. Oh, father, hast thou brought my golden ball and come to set me free?" And the father answered, "I've neither brought thy golden ball nor come to set thee free, but I have come to see thee hung upon this gallows tree." Then the hangman said, "Hast thee done thy prayers? Now, lass, put thy head into the noose." But she answered, Stop, stop! I think I see my brother coming." And again she sang her little verse, and the brother sang back the same words. And so with her sister, her uncle, her aunt, and her cousin. But they all said the same: "I've neither brought thy golden ball, nor come to set thee free, but I have come to see thee hung upon this gallows tree." Then the hangman said, "I will stop no longer. Thou art making game of me. Thou must be hung at once." But now at long last she saw her sweetheart coming through the crowd, so she cried to him: "Stop, stop! I see my sweetheart coming. Sweetheart, hast thou brought my golden ball, and come to set me free?" Then her sweetheart held up her golden ball and cried: "Aye, I have brought to thee thy golden ball, and come to set thee free. I have not come to see thee hung upon this gallows tree." So he took her home then and there, and they lived happy ever after. End of chapter 11.
Chapter 12 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Elizabeth Parsons. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. Chapter 12. The Two Sisters. Once upon a time there were two sisters, who were as like each other as two peas in a pod, but one was good and the other was bad-tempered. Now their father had no work, so the girls began to think of going to service. "I will go first and see what I can make of it," said the younger sister ever so cheerfully. "Then you, sis, can follow if I have good luck." So she packed up a bundle, said goodbye, and started to find a place, but no one in the town wanted a girl, and she went farther afield into the country. And as she journeyed, she came upon an oven in which a lot of loaves were baking. Now as she passed, the loaves cried out with one voice, little girl, take us out. Please take us out. We have been baking for 7 years, and no one has come to take us out. Do take us out, or we shall soon be burnt." Then, being a kind, obliging little girl, she stopped, put down her bundle, took out the bread, and went on her way, saying, "You will be more comfortable now." After a time she came to a cow lowing beside an empty pail, and the cow said to her, little girl, milk me, please milk me. 7 years have I been waiting, but no one has come to milk me." So the kind girl stopped, put down her bundle, milked the cow into the pail, and went on her way, saying, "Now you will be more comfortable." By and by she came to an apple tree so laden with fruit that its branches were nigh to break, and the apple tree called to her, little girl, please shake my branches. The fruit is so heavy I can't stand straight." Then the kind girl stopped, put down her bundle, and shook the branches so that the apples fell off, and the tree could stand straight. Then she went on her way, saying, "You will be more comfortable now." So she journeyed on till she came to a house where an old witch woman lived. Now this witch woman wanted a servant maid, and promised good wages. Therefore the girl agreed to stop with her and try how she liked service. She had to sweep the floor, keep the house clean and tidy, the fire bright and cheery. But there was one thing the witch woman said she must never do, and that was look up the chimney. "If you do," said the witch woman, "something will fall down on you, and you will come to a bad end." Well, the girl swept and dusted and made up the fire, but nearer a penny of wages did she see. Now the girl wanted to go home, as she did not like witch service, for the witch used to have boiled babies for supper, and bury the bones under some stones in the garden. But she did not like to go home penniless, so she stayed on sweeping and dusting and doing her work, just as if she was pleased. Then one day, as she was sweeping up the hearth, down tumbled some soot, and, without remembering she was forbidden to look up the chimney, she looked up to see where the soot came from, and lo and behold, a big bag of gold fell plump into her lap. Now the witch happened to be out on one of her witch errands, so the girl thought it a fine opportunity to be off home. So she kilted up her petticoats and started to run home, but she had only gone a little way when she heard the witch woman coming after her on her broomstick. Now the apple tree she had helped to stand straight happened to be quite close, so she ran to it and cried, apple tree, hide me, so the old witch can't find me, for if she does, she'll pick my bones and bury me under the garden stones." Then the apple tree said, "Of course I will. You helped me to stand straight, and one good turn deserves another." So the apple tree hid her finely in its green branches, and when the witch flew past, saying, "Tree of mine, oh tree of mine, have you seen my naughty little maid? With a willy willy wag and a great big bag, she's stolen my money, all I had." The apple tree answered, "No, mother dear, not for 7 year." So the witch flew on the wrong way, and the girl got down, thanked the tree politely, and started again. But just as she got to where the cow was standing beside the pail, she heard the witch coming again. So she ran to the cow and cried, "Cow, cow, please hide me, so the witch can't find me. If she does, she'll pick my bones and bury me under the garden stones." "Certainly I will," answered the cow. "Didn't you milk me and make me comfortable? Hide yourself behind me, and you'll be quite safe." And when the witch flew by and called to the cow, "Oh, cow of mine, have you seen my naughty little maid, with a willy willy wag and a great big bag, who stole my money, all that I had?" She just said politely, "No, mother dear, not for 7 year." Then the old witch went on in the wrong direction, and the girl started afresh on her way home. But just as she got to where the oven stood, she heard that horrid old witch coming behind her again. So she ran as fast as she could to the oven and cried, "Oh, oven, oven, hide me, so as the witch can't find me. For if she does, she'll pick my bones and bury them under the garden stones." Then the oven said, "I am afraid there is no room for you, as another batch of bread is baking. But there is the baker. Ask him." So she asked the baker, and he said, "Of course I will. You saved my last batch from being burnt, so run into the bakehouse. You will be quite safe there, and I will settle the witch for you." So she hid in the bakehouse, only just in time, for there was the old witch calling angrily, "Oh, man of mine, have you seen my naughty little maid, with a willy willy wag and a great big bag, who stole my money, all I had?" Then the baker replied, "Look in the oven, she may be there." And the witch alighted from her broomstick and peered into the oven, but she could see no one. "Creep in and look in the farthest corner," said the baker slyly, and the witch crept in when, bang! He shut the door in her face, and there she was roasting. And when she came out with the bread, she was all crisp and brown, and had to go home as best she could and put cold cream all over her. But the kind, obliging little girl got safe home with her bag of money. Now the ill-tempered elder sister was very jealous of this good luck, and determined to get a bag of gold for herself. So she, in turn, packed up a bundle and started to seek service by the same road. But when she came to the oven, and the loaves begged her to take them out because they had been baking 7 years and were nigh to burning, she tossed her head and said, "A likely story indeed, that I should burn my fingers to save your crusts. No, thank you." And with that she went on till she came across the cow, standing waiting to be milked beside the pail. But when the cow said, little girl, milk me, please milk me. I've waited 7 years to be milked," she only laughed and replied, "You may wait another 7 years for all I care. I'm not your dairy maid." And with that she went on till she came to the apple tree, all overburdened by its fruit. But when it begged her to shake its branches, she only giggled, and plucking one ripe apple said, One is enough for me. You can keep the rest yourself." And with that she went on munching the apple till she came to the witch woman's house. Now the witch woman, though she had gotten over being crisp and brown from the oven, was dreadfully angry with all little maidservants, and made up her mind this one should not trick her. So for a long time she never went out of the house. Thus the ill-tempered sister never had a chance of looking up the chimney, as she had meant to do at once, and she had to dust and clean and brush and sweep ever so hard until she was quite tired out. But one day, when the witch woman went into the garden to bury her bones, she seized the moment, looked up the chimney, and sure enough, a bag of gold fell plump into her lap. Well, she was off with it in a moment, and ran till she came to the apple tree, when she heard the witch woman behind her. So she cried as her sister had done, apple tree, hide me, so the old witch can't find me, for if she does she'll break my bones, or bury me under the garden stones." But the apple tree said, "No room here, I've too many apples." So she had to run on, and when the witch woman on her broomstick came flying by and called, "Oh, tree of mine, have you seen a naughty little maid, with a willy wag and a great big bag, who's stolen my money, all I had?" The apple tree replied, "Yes, mother dear, she's gone down there." Then the witch woman went after her, caught her, gave her a thorough good beating, took the bag of money away from her, and sent her home without a penny payment for all her dusting and sweeping and brushing and cleaning. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Elizabeth Parsons. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. Chapter 13. The Laidly Worm. In Bamborough Castle there once lived a king who had 2 children, a son named Childe Wynde and a daughter who was called May Margaret. Their mother, a fair woman, was dead, and the king mourned her long and faithfully. But after his son Childe Wynde went to seek his fortune, the king, hunting in the forest, came across a lady of such great beauty that he fell in love with her at once and determined to marry her. Now Princess May Margaret was not overpleased to think that her mother's place should be taken by a strange woman, nor was she pleased to think that she would have to give up keeping house for her father the king, for she had always taken a pride in her work. But she said nothing, though she stood long on the castle walls, looking out across the sea, wishing for her dear brother's return. For, see you, they had mothered each other. Still no news came of Childe Wynde, so on the day when the old king was to bring the new queen home, May Margaret counted over the keys of the castle chambers, knotted them on a string, and after casting them over her left shoulder for luck, more for her father's sake than for the new queen's regard, she stood at the castle gate, ready to hand over the keys to her stepmother. Now as the bridal procession approached, with all the lords of the north country and some of the Scots lords in attendance, she looked so fair and so sweet that the lords whispered to one another of her beauty. And when, after saying in a voice like a mavis, "Oh, welcome, welcome, father, unto your halls and towers, and welcome to my stepmother, for all that's here is yours," she turned upon the step and tripped into the yard, the Scots lords said aloud, "Forsooth, May Margaret's grace surpasses all that we have met. She has so fair a face." Now the new queen overheard this, and she stamped her foot, and her face flushed with anger as she turned her about and called, You might have accepted me, but I will bring May Margaret to a Laidly Worm's degree. I'll bring her low as a Laidly Worm that warps about a stone, and not till the child of wind come back will the witching be undone." Well, hearing this, May Margaret laughed, not knowing that her new stepmother, for all her beauty, was a witch, and the laugh made the wicked woman still more angry. So that same night she left her royal bed, and, returning to the lonely cave where she had ever done her magic, she cast Princess May Margaret under a spell with charms 3 times 3 and passes 9 times 9. And this was her spell: "I weird ye to a Laidly Worm, and such sail ye ever be, until Childe Wynde, the king's dear son, comes home across the sea. Until the world comes to an end, unspelled ye'll never be, unless Childe Wynde of his own free will sail give you kisses 3." So it came to pass that Princess May Margaret went to her bed a beauteous maiden, full of grace, and rose next morning a Laidly Worm. For when her tirewomen came to dress her, they found coiled up in her bed an awesome dragon, which uncoiled itself and came towards them. And when they ran away terrified, the Laidly Worm crawled and crept and crawled down to the sea till it reached the rock of the Spindlestone, which is called the Heugh. And there it curled itself round the stone and lay basking in the sun. Then for 7 miles east and 7 miles west and 7 miles north and south, the whole countryside knew the hunger of the Laidly Worm of Spindlestone Heugh, for it drove the awesome beast to leave its resting place at night and devour everything it came across. At last a wise warlock told the people that if they wished to be quit of these horrors, they must take every drop of the milk of 7 white milch kine every morn and every eve to the trough of stone at the foot of the Heugh for the Laidly Worm to drink. And this they did, and after that the Laidly Worm troubled the countryside no longer, but lay warped about the Heugh, looking out to sea with its terrible snout in the air. But the word of its doings had gone east and had gone west. It had even gone over the sea and had come to Childe Wynde's ears. And the news of it angered him, for he thought perchance it had something to do with his beloved sister May Margaret's disappearance. So he called his men at arms together and said, "We must sail to Bamborough and land by Spindlestone, so as to quell and kill this Laidly Worm." Then they built a ship without delay, laying the keel with wood from the rowan tree. And they made masts of rowan wood also, and oars likewise, and, so furnished, set forth. Now the wicked queen knew by her arts they were coming, so she sent out her imps to still the winds, so that the fluttering sails of silk hung idle on the masts. But Childe Wynde was not to be bested, so he called out the oarsmen. Thus it came to pass that one morn the wicked queen, looking from the keep, saw the gallant ship in Bamborough Bay, and she sent out all her witch wives and her impets to raise a storm and sink the ship. But they came back unable to hurt it, for, see you, it was built of rowan wood, over which witches have no power. Then, as a last device, the witch queen laid spells upon the Laidly Worm, saying, "O Laidly Worm, go make their topmast heel. Go, worm the sand, and creep beneath the keel." Now the Laidly Worm had no choice but to obey. So the worm leapt up, the worm leapt down, and plaited round each plank. And aye as the ship came close to shore, she heeled as if she sank. 3 times 3 did Childe Wynde attempt to land, and 3 times 3 the laidly worm kept the good ship from the shore. At last Childe Wynde gave the word to put the ship about, and the witch queen, who was watching from the keep, thought he had given up, but he was not to be bested, for he only rounded the next point to Budleigh Sands, and there, jumping into the shoal water, he got safely to land, and drawing his sword of proof, rushed up to fight the awesome worm. But as he raised his sword to strike, he heard a voice, soft as the western wind. "O quit thy sword, unbend thy bow, and give me kisses 3, for though I seem a laidly worm, no harm I'll do to thee." And the voice seemed to him like the voice of his dear sister, May Margaret, so he stayed his hand. Then once again the laidly worm said, "O quit thy sword, unbend thy bow, my laidly form forget, forgive the wrong and kiss me thrice, for love of May Margaret." Then Childe Wynde, remembering how he had loved his sister, put his arms round the laidly worm and kissed it once. And he kissed the loathly thing twice, and he kissed it yet a third time as he stood with the wet sand at his feet. Then with a hiss and a roar the laidly worm sank to the sand, and in his arms was May Margaret. He wrapped her in his mantle, for she trembled in the cold sea air, and carried her to Bamborough Castle, where the wicked queen, knowing her hour was come, stood, all deserted by her imps and witchwives, on the stairs, twisting her hands. Then Childe Wynde, looking at her, cried, "Woe, woe to thee, thou wicked witch! An ill fate shalt thine be. The doom thou dreed on May Margaret, the same doom shalt thou dree. Henceforth thou'lt be a laidly toad, that in the clay doth wend, and unspelled thou wilt never be, till this world hath an end." And as he spoke, the wicked queen began to shrivel, and she shriveled and shriveled to a horrid wrinkled toad that hopped down the castle steps and disappeared in a crevice. But to this day a loathsome toad is sometimes seen haunting Bamborough Keep, and that laidly toad is the wicked witch queen. But Childe Wynde and Princess May Margaret loved each other as much as ever, and lived happily ever after. End of chapter 13.
Chapter number 14 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. The Titty Mouse and Tatty Mouse. Titty Mouse and Tatty Mouse both lived in a house. Titty Mouse went a-gleaning, and Tatty Mouse went a-gleaning. So they both went a-gleaning. Titty Mouse gleaned an ear of corn, and Tatty Mouse gleaned an ear of corn. So they both gleaned an ear of corn. Titty Mouse made a pudding, and Tatty Mouse made a pudding. So they both made a pudding. And Tatty Mouse put her pudding into the pot to boil, but when Titty went to put hers in, the pot tumbled over and scalded her to death, and Tatty sat down and wept. Then the three-legged stool said, "Tatty, why do you weep?" "Titty's dead," said Tatty, "and I do, and so I weep." "Then," said the stool, "I'll hop." So the stool hopped. Then a broom in the corner of the room said, "Stool, why do you hop?" "Oh," said the stool, "Titty's dead, and Tatty weeps, and so I hop." "Then," said the broom, "I'll sweep." So the broom began to sweep. Then said the door, "Broom, why do you sweep?" "Oh," said the broom, "Titty's dead, and Tatty weeps, and the stool hops, and so I sweep." "Then," said the door, "I'll jar." So the door jarred. Then the window said, "Door, why do you jar?" "Oh," said the door, "Titty's dead, and Tatty weeps, and the stool hops, and the broom sweeps, and so I jar." "Then," said the window, "I'll creak." So the window creaked. Now there was an old form outside the house, and when the window creaked, the form said, "Window, why do you creak?" "Oh," said the window, "Titty's dead, and Tatty weeps, and the stool hops, and the broom sweeps, the door jars, and so I creak." "Then," said the old form, "I'll gallop round the house." So the old form galloped round the house. Now there was a fine large walnut tree growing by the cottage, and the tree said to the form, "Form, why do you gallop round the house?" "Oh," said the form, "Titty's dead, and Tatty weeps, and the stool hops, and the broom sweeps, the door jars, and the window creaks, and so I gallop round the house." "Then," said the walnut tree, "I'll shed my leaves." So the walnut tree shed all its beautiful green leaves. Now there was a little bird perched on one of the boughs of the tree, and when all the leaves fell, it said, "Walnut tree, why do you shed your leaves?" "Oh," said the tree, "Titty's dead, and Tatty weeps, the stool hops, and the broom sweeps, the door jars, and the window creaks, the old form gallops round the house, and so I shed my leaves." "Then," said the little bird, "I'll moult all my feathers." So he moulted all his gay feathers. Now there was a little girl walking below, carrying a jug of milk for his brothers and sisters' supper, and when she saw the poor little bird moult all its feathers, she said, "Little bird, why do you moult all your feathers?" "Oh," said the little bird, "Titty's dead, and Tatty weeps, the stool hops, and the broom sweeps, the door jars, and the window creaks, the old form gallops round the house, the walnut tree sheds its leaves, and so I moult all my feathers." "Then," said the little girl, "I'll spill the milk." So she dropped the pitcher and spilt the milk. Now there was an old man just by on the top of the ladder thatching a rick, and when he saw the little girl spill the milk, he said, "Little girl, what do you mean by spilling the milk? Your little brothers and sisters must go without their suppers." Then said the little girl, "Titty's dead, and Tatty weeps, the stool hops, and the broom sweeps, the door jars, and the window creaks, the old form gallops round the house, the walnut tree sheds all its leaves, the little bird moults all its feathers, and so I spill the milk." "Oh," said the old man, "then I'll tumble off the ladder and break my neck." So he tumbled off the ladder and broke his neck. And when the old man broke his neck, the great walnut tree fell down with a crash, and upset the old form and house, and the house falling knocked the window out, and the window knocked the door down, and the door upset the broom, and the broom upset the stool, and poor little Tatty Mouse was buried beneath the ruins. End of chapter 14. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.
Chapter 15 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. Chapter 15 Jack and the Beanstalk. A long time ago, when most of the world was young, and folk did what they liked, all because things were good, there lived a boy called Jack. His father was bedridden, and his mother, a good soul, was busy early morns and late eves, planning and placing how to support her sick husband and her young son by selling the milk and butter which Milky White, the beautiful cow, gave them without stint. For it was summer-time, but winter came on. The herbs of the field took refuge from the frosts in the warm earth. And though his mother sent Jack to gather what fodder he could get in the hedgerows, he came back as often as not with a very empty sack. For Jack's eyes were so often full of wonder at all the things he saw that sometimes he forgot to work. So it came to pass that one morning Milk White gave no milk at all, not one drain. Then the good, hard-working mother threw her apron over her head and sobbed, "What shall we do? What shall we do?" Now Jack loved his mother. Besides, he felt just a bit sneaky at being such a big boy and doing so little to help, so he said, cheer up, I'll go and get work somewhere." And he felt as he spoke as if he would work his fingers to the bone, but the good woman shook her head mournfully. "You've tried that before, Jack," she said, "and nobody would keep you. You are quite a good lad, but your wits go a wool gathering. No, we must sell Milky White, and live on the money. It is no use crying over milk that is not here to spill." You see, she was a wise as well as a hard-working woman, and Jack's spirits rose. "Just so," he cried. "We will sell Milky White and be richer than ever. It's an ill wind that blows no one good. So, as it is market day, I'll just take her there, and we shall see what we shall see." "But," began his mother. "But doesn't butter parsnips?" laughed Jack. "Trust me to make a good bargain." So, as it was washing day, and her sick husband was more ailing than usual, his mother let Jack set off to sell the cow. "Not less than 10 pounds!" she bawled after him as he turned the corner. 10 pounds indeed! Jack had made up his mind to 20 solid gold sovereigns. He was just settling what he should buy his mother as a faring out of the money, when he saw a queer little old man on the road who called out, "Good morning, Jack." "Good morning," replied Jack, with a polite bow, wondering how the queer little old man happened to know his name, though to be sure Jack's were as plentiful as blackberries. "And where may you be going?" asked the queer little old man. Jack wondered again. He was always wondering, you know, what the queer little old man had to do with it. But being always polite, he replied, "I am going to the market to sell Milky White, and I mean to make a good bargain." So you will," chuckled the queer little old man. "You look the sort of chap for it. I bet you know how many beans make 5? 2 in each hand, and 1 in my mouth," answered Jack readily. He really was sharp as a needle. Just so," chuckled the queer little old man, and as he spoke he drew out of his pocket 5 beans. "Well, here they are, so give us Milky White." Jack was so flabbergasted that he stood with his mouth open, as if he expected the 5th bean to fly into it. "What?" he said at last. "My Milky White for 5 common beans? Not if I know it." "But they aren't common beans," put in the queer little old man, and there was a queer little smile on his queer little face. "If you plant these beans overnight, by morning they will have grown up right into the very sky." Jack was too flabbergasted this time even to open his mouth. His eyes opened instead. "Did you say right into the very sky?" he asked at last. For, see you, Jack had wondered more about the sky than about anything else. "Right up into the very sky," repeated the queer old man, with a nod between each word. "It's a good bargain, Jack, and as fair play's a jewel. If they don't, why, meet me here to-morrow morning, and you shall have Milky White back again. Will that please you?" "Right as a trivet," called Jack, without stopping to think, and the next moment he found himself standing on an empty road. "Two in each hand and one in my mouth," repeated Jack. "That is what I said, and what I'll do. Everything in order, and if what the queer little old man said isn't true, I shall get Milky White back tomorrow morning." So whistling and munching the bean, he trudged home, cheerfully, wondering what the sky would be like if he ever got there. "What a long time you've been!" exclaimed his mother, who was watching anxiously for him at the gate. "It is past sunsetting, but I see you have sold Milky White. Tell me quick, how much you got for her?" "You'll never guess," began Jack. "Laws a mercy, you don't say so," interrupted the good woman. "And I worriting all day lest they should take you in. What was it, £10? 15? Sure it can't be 20." Jack held out the beans triumphantly. "There," he said, "that's what I got her for, and a jolly good bargain too." It was his mother's turn to be flabbergasted, but all she said was, "What? Them beans?" "Yes," replied Jack, beginning to doubt his own wisdom, "but they're magic beans. If you plant them overnight, by morning they grow right up into the sky." "Oh, oh, please don't hit so hard." For Jack's mother for once had lost her temper, and was laboring, and was bellabouring the boy for all she was worth, and when she had finished scolding and beating, she flung the miserable beans out the window and sent him, supperless, to bed. If this was the magical effort of the beans, thought Jack ruefully, he didn't want any more magic, if you please. However, being healthy and as a rule happy, he soon fell asleep and slept like a top. When he awoke, he thought at first it was moonlight, for everything in the room showed greenish. Then he stared at the little window. It was covered as if with a curtain by leaves. He was out of bed in a trice, and the next moment, without waiting to dress, was climbing up the biggest beanstalk you ever saw. For what the queer little old man had said was true. One of the beans which his mother had chucked into the garden had found soil, taken root, and grown in the night. Where? Up to the very sky. Jack meant to see at any rate. So he climbed, and he climbed, and he climbed. It was easy work, for the big beanstalk, with the leaves growing out of each side, was like a ladder. For all that, he soon was out of breath. Then he got his second wind, and was just beginning to wonder if he had a third, when he saw in front of him a wide, shining white road, stretching away and away and away. So he took to walking, and he walked and walked and walked, till he came to a tall shining white house, with a wide white doorstep, and on the doorstep stood a great big woman with a black porridge pot in her hand. Now Jack, having had no supper, was hungry as a hunter, and when he saw the porridge pot, he said quite politely, "Good morning. I wonder if you could give me some breakfast." "Breakfast?" echoed the woman, who, in truth, was an ogre's wife. "If it is breakfast you're wanting, it's breakfast you'll likely be. For I expect my man home every instant, and there is nothing he likes better for breakfast than a fat boy grilled on toast." Now Jack was not a bit of a coward, and when he wanted a thing he generally got it. So he said, cheerful like, "I'd be fatter if I'd had my breakfast." Whereat the ogre's wife laughed and bade Jack come in, for she was not really half as bad as she looked. But he had hardly finished the great bowl of porridge and the milk she gave him when the whole house began to tremble and quake. It was the ogre coming home. Thump, thump, thump. "Into the oven with you, sharp!" cried the ogre's wife, and the iron oven door was just closed when the ogre strode in. Jack could see him through the little peephole slide at the top where the steam came out. He was a big one for sure. He had 3 sheep strung to his belt, and these he threw down on the table. "Here, wife," he cried, "roast me 3 snippets for breakfast. They are all I've been able to get this morning, worse luck. I hope the oven's hot." And he went to touch the handle, while Jack burst out all of a sweat wondering what would happen next. "Roast," echoed the ogre's wife. "Pooh, the little things would dry to cinders. Better boil them." So she set to work to boil them, but the ogre began sniffing about the room. "They don't smell mutton meat," he growled. Then he frowned horribly and began the real ogre's rhymes. "Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." "Don't be silly," said his wife. "It's the bones of the little boy you had for supper that I'm boiling down for soup. Come, eat your breakfast, there's a good ogre." So the ogre ate his 3 sheep, and when he had done, he went to a big oaken chest and took out 3 big bags of gold pieces. These he put on the table and began to count their contents while his wife cleared away the breakfast things, and by his head began to nod, and at last he began to snore, and snored so loud that the whole house shook. Then Jack nipped out of the oven and, seizing one of the bars of gold, crept away, and ran along the straight, wide, shining white road as fast as his legs would carry him, till he came to the Beanstalk. He couldn't climb down it with the bag of gold, it was so heavy. So he just flung his burden down first, and, helter-kilter, climbed after it. And when he came to the bottom, there was his mother picking up gold pieces out of the garden as fast as she could, for, of course, the bag had burst. "Laws-a-mercy me," she says, "wherever have you been? See, it's been raining gold." "No, it hasn't," began Jack. "I climbed up—" Then he turned to look for the Beanstalk, but lo and behold, it wasn't there at all. So he knew then it was all real magic. After that they lived happily on the gold pieces for a long time, and the bedridden father got all sorts of nice things to eat. But at last a day came when Jack's mother showed a doleful face as she put a big yellow sovereign into Jack's hand, and bade him be careful marketing, because there was not one more in the coffer. After that they must starve. That night Jack went supperless to bed of his own accord. If he couldn't make money, he thought, at any rate he could eat less money. It was a shame for a big boy to stuff himself and bring no grist to the mill. He slept like a top, as boys do when they don't overeat themselves, and when he awoke, hey, presto! The whole room showed greenish, and there was a curtain of leaves over the window. Another bean had grown in the night, and Jack was up it like a lamplighter before you could say knife. This time he didn't take nearly so long climbing until he reached the straight, wide white road, and in a trice he found himself before the tall white house, where on the wide white steps the ogre's wife was standing with the black porridge pot in her hand. And this time Jack was as bold as brass. "Good morning, he said. "I've come to ask you for breakfast, for I had no supper, and I'm as hungry as a hunter." "Go away, bad boy," replied the ogre's wife. "Last time I gave a boy breakfast my man missed a whole bag of gold. I believe you are the same boy." "Maybe I am, maybe I'm not," said Jack with a laugh. "I'll tell you true when I've had my breakfast, but not till then." So the ogre's wife, who was dreadfully curious, gave him a big bowl of porridge. But before he had half finished it, he heard the ogre coming, Thump, thump, thump. "In with you, to the oven!" shrieked the ogre's wife. "You shall tell me when he has gone to sleep." This time Jack saw through the steam peephole that the ogre had 3 fat calves strung to his belt. "Better luck today, wife!" he cried, and his voice shook the house. "Quick, roast these trifles for my breakfast. I hope the oven's hot." And he went to feel the handle of the door, but his wife cried out sharply, "Roast? Why, you'd have to wait hours before they were done. I'll boil them. See how bright the fire is." "Umph!" growled the ogre, and then he began sniffing and calling out, "Fee, fi, fo, fum! I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." "Twaddle!" said the ogre's wife. "It's only the bones of the boy you had last week that I've put into the pig bucket." "Ugh!" said the ogre harshly, but he ate the broiled calves, and then he said to his wife, "Bring me my hen that lays the magic eggs. I want to see gold." So the ogre's wife brought him a great big black hen with a shining red comb. She plumped it down on the table and took away the breakfast things. Then the ogre said to the hen, "Lay," and it promptly laid, what do you think? A beautiful, shiny, yellow, golden egg. "None so dusty, Henny Penny," laughed the ogre. "I shan't have to beg as long as I've got you." Then he said, "Lay," once more, and lo and behold, there was another beautiful, shiny, yellow, golden egg. Jack could hardly believe his eyes, and made up his mind that he would have that hen, come what might. So when the ogre began to doze, he just out like a flash from the oven, seized the hen, and ran for his life. But you see, he reckoned without his prize, for hens, you know, always crackle when they leave their nests after laying an egg, and this one set up such a scrawling that it woke the ogre. "Where's my hen?" he shouted, and his wife came rushing in, and they both rushed to the door, but Jack had got the better of them by a good start, and all they could see was a little figure right away down the wide white road, holding a big, scrawling, cackling, fluttering black hen by the legs. How Jack got down the beanstalk he never knew. It was all wings and leaves and feathers and cacklings, but get down he did, and there was his mother, wondering if the sky was going to fall. But the very moment Jack touched ground, he called out, "Lay!" and the black hen ceased cackling and laid a great big shiny yellow golden egg. So every one was satisfied, and from that moment everybody had everything that money could buy. For whenever they wanted anything, they just said "Lay," and the black hen provided them with gold. But Jack began to wonder if he couldn't find something else besides money in the sky. So one fine moonlight midsummer night he refused his supper, and before he went to bed stole out to the garden with a big watering can, and watered the ground under his window, for, thought he, there must be 2 more beans somewhere, and perhaps it is too dry for them to grow. Then he slept like a top. And lo and behold, when he awoke, there was the green light shimmering through his room, and there he was, in an instant, on the beanstalk, climbing, climbing, climbing for all he was worth. But this time he knew better than to ask for his breakfast, for the ogre's wife would be sure to recognize him. So he just hid in some bushes beside the great white house, till he saw her in the scullery, and then he slipped out and hid himself in the copper, for he knew she would be sure to look in the oven first thing. And by he heard thump, 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 and peeping through a crack in the copper lid, he could see the ogre stalk in with 3 huge oxen strung at his belt. But this time, no sooner had the ogre got into the house than he began shouting, "Fee, fi, fo, fum! I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. For, see you, the copper lid didn't fit tight, like the oven door, and ogres have noses like a dog's for scent." "Well, I declare, so do I!" exclaimed the ogre's wife. "It will be that horrid boy who stole the bag of gold and the hen." "If so, he's hid in the oven." But when she opened the door, lo and behold, Jack wasn't there. Only some joints of meat roasting and sizzling away. Then she laughed and said, "You and me be fools for sure. Why, it's a boy you caught last night, as I was getting ready for your breakfast. Yes, we be fools to take dead meat for live flesh. So eat your breakfast, and there's a good ogre." But the ogre, though he enjoyed roast boy very much, wasn't satisfied, and every now and then he would burst out with "Fee, fi, fo, fum," and get up and search the cupboards, keeping Jack in a fever of fear lest he should think of the copper. But he didn't, and when he had finished his breakfast he called out to his wife, "Bring me my magic harp, I want to be amused." So she brought out a little harp and put it on the table, and the ogre leant back in his chair and said lazily, "Sing." And lo and behold, the harp began to sing. If you want to know what it sang about, why, it sang about everything, and it sang so beautifully that Jack forgot to be frightened, and the ogre forgot to think of "Fee, fi, fo, fum," and fell asleep, and did not snore. Then Jack stole out of the copper like a mouse, and crept hands and knees to the table, raised himself up ever so softly, and laid hold of the magic harp, for he was determined to have it. But no sooner had he touched it than it cried out quite loud, "Master, master!" So the ogre woke, saw Jack making off, and rushed after him. My goodness, it was a race! Jack was nimble, but the ogre's stride was twice as long, so, though Jack turned and twisted and doubled like a hare, yet at last, when he got to the beanstalk, the ogre was not a dozen yards behind him. There wasn't time to think, so Jack just flung himself on to the stalk and began to go down as fast as he could, while the harp kept calling, "Master, master," at the very top of its voice. He had only got down about a quarter of the way when there was the most awful lurch you can think of, and Jack nearly fell off the beanstalk. It was the ogre beginning to climb down, and his weight made the stalk sway like a tree in a storm. Then Jack knew it was life or death, and he climbed down faster and faster, and as he climbed he shouted, "Mother, mother, bring an axe, bring an axe." Now his mother, as luck would have it, was in the backyard chopping wood, and she ran out thinking that this time the sky must have fallen. Just at that moment Jack touched ground, and he flung down the harp, which immediately began to sing all sorts of beautiful things, and he seized the axe, and gave a great chop at the beanstalk, which shook and swayed and bent like barley before a breeze. "Have a care!" shouted the ogre, clinging on as hard as he could, but Jack did have a care, and he dealt that beanstalk such a shrewd blow that the whole of it, ogre and all, came toppling down, and of course the ogre broke his crown, so that he died on the spot. After that every one was quite happy, for they had gold and to spare, and if the bed-ridden father was dull, Jack just brought out the harp and said, "Sing," and lo and behold, it sang about everything under the sun. So Jack ceased wondering so much and became quite a useful person. And the last bean hasn't grown yet. It is still in the garden. I wonder if it will ever grow, and what little child will climb its beanstalk into the sky, and what will that child find? Goody me! End of Chapter 15.
Chapter 16 of English Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Annie Hill. English Fairy Tales by Flora Annie Steele. The Black Bull of Norway. Long ago in Norway there lived a lady who had 3 daughters. Now they were all pretty, and one night they fell a-talking of whom they meant to marry. And the eldest said, "I will have no one lower than an earl." And the second said, "I will have none lower than a lord." But the third, the prettiest and the merriest, tossed her head and said, with a twinkle in her eye, "Why so proud? As for me, I would be content with the Black Bull of Norway." At that the other sisters bade her be silent, and not talk lightly of such a monster. For you see, is it not written, "To wilder measures now they turn, the black bull of Norway. Sudden the tapers cease to burn, the minstrels cease to play." So, no doubt, the Black Bull of Norway was held to be a horrid monster. But the youngest daughter would have her laugh, so she said 3 times that she would be content with the Black Bull of Norway. Well, it so happened that the very next morning a coach and 6 came swinging along the road, and in it sate an earl, who had come to ask the hand of the eldest daughter in marriage. So there were great rejoicings over the wedding, and the bride and bridegroom drove away in the coach and 6. Then the next thing that happened was that a coach and 4 with a lord in it came swinging along the road, and he wanted to marry the second daughter. So they were wed, and there were great rejoicings, and the bride and the bridegroom drove away in the coach and 4. Now after this there was only the youngest, the prettiest and the merriest of the sisters left, and she became the apple of her mother's eye. So you may imagine how the mother felt when one morning a terrible bellowing was heard at the door, and there was a great big black bull waiting for his bride. She wept and she wailed, and at first the girl ran away and hid herself in the cellar for fear. But there the bull stood waiting, and at last the girl came up and said, "I promised I would be content with the Black Bull of Norway, and I must keep my word. Farewell, mother, you will not see me again." Then she mounted on the Black Bull's back, and it walked away with her quite quietly, and ever it chose the smoothest paths and the easiest roads, so that at last the girl grew less afraid. But she became very hungry, and was nigh to faint, when the Black Bull said to her, in quite a soft voice that wasn't a bellow at all, "Eat out of my left ear, drink out of my right, and set by what you leave to serve the morrow's night." So she did as she was bid, and lo and behold, the left ear was full of delicious things to eat, and the right was full of the most delicious drinks, and there was plenty left over for several days. Thus they journeyed on, and they journeyed on through many dreadful forests and many lonely wastes, and the Black Bull never paused for bite or sup, but ever the girl he carried ate out of his left ear and drank out of his right, and set by what she left to serve the morrow's night, and she slept soft and warm on his broad back. Now at last they reached a noble castle, where a large company of lords and ladies were assembled, and greatly the company wondered at the sight of these strange companions, and they invited the girl to supper. But the Black Bull they turned into the field, and left to spend the night after his kind. But when the next morning came, there he was, ready for his burden again. Now, though the girl was loath to leave her pleasant companions, she remembered her promise, and mounted on his back. So they journeyed on, and journeyed on, and journeyed on, through many tangled woods and over many high mountains. And ever the Black Bull chose the smoothest paths for her, and set aside the briars and brambles, while she ate out of his left ear and drank out of his right. So at last they came to a magnificent mansion where dukes and duchesses and earls and countesses were enjoying themselves. Now the company, though much surprised at the strange companions, asked the girl into supper, and the Black Bull they would have turned into the park for the night, but that the girl, remembering how well he had cared for her, asked them to put him into the stable and give him a good feed. So this was done, and the next morning he was waiting before the hall door for his burden, and she, though somewhat loath at leaving the fine company, mounted him cheerfully enough, and they rode away, and they rode away, and they rode away, through thick briar brakes and up fearsome cliffs. But ever the Black Bull trod the brambles underfoot, and chose the easiest paths, while she ate out of his left ear and drank out of his right, and wanted for nothing, though he had neither bite nor sup. So it came to pass that he grew tired, and was limping with one foot, when, just as the sun was setting, they came to a beautiful palace, where princes and princesses were disporting themselves with ball on the green grass. Now, though the company greatly wondered at the strange companions, they asked the girl to join them, and ordered the grooms to lead away the Black Bull to a field. But she, remembering all he had done for her, said, "Not so, he will stay with me." Then, seeing a large thorn in the foot with which he had been limping, she stooped down and pulled it out. And lo and behold! In an instant, to everyone's surprise, there appeared not a frightful monstrous bull, but one of the most beautiful princes ever beheld, who fell at his deliverer's feet, thanking her for having broken his cruel enchantment. A wicked witch-woman who wanted to marry him had, he said, spelled him until a beautiful maiden of her own free will should do him a favour. "But," he said, "the danger is not all over. You have broken the enchantment by night, that by day has yet to be overcome." So the next morning the prince had to resume the form of a bull, and they set out together, and they rode, and they rode, and they rode, till they came to a dark and ugsome glen, where he bade her dismount and sit on a great rock. "Here you must stay," he said, "while I go yonder and fight the Old One. And mind, move neither hand nor foot whilst I am away, else I shall never find you again. If everything around you turns blue, I shall have beaten the Old One, but if everything turns red, he will have conquered me." And with that, and a tremendous roaring bellow, he set off to find his foe. Well, she sate as still as a mouse, moving neither hand nor foot, nor even her eyes, and waited, and waited, and waited. Then, at last, everything turned blue, but she was so overcome with joy to think that her lover was victorious that she forgot to keep still, and lifting one of her feet, crossed it over the other. So she waited, and waited, and waited. Long she sate, and aye she wearied, and all the time he was seeking for her, but he never found her. At last she rose and went she knew not whither, determined to seek for her lover through the whole wide world. So she journeyed on, and she journeyed on, and she journeyed on, until one day in a dark wood she came to a little hut where lived an old, old woman, who gave her food and shelter, and bid her God-speed on her errand, giving her 3 nuts, a walnut, a filbert, and a hazelnut, with these words: "When your heart is like to break, and once again is like to break, crack a nut, and in its shell that will be that suits you well." After this she felt heartened up, and wandered on till her road was blocked by a great hill of glass. And though she tried all she could to climb it, she could not. For aye she slipped back, and slipped back, and slipped back, for it was like ice. Then she sought a passage elsewhere, and around and about the foot of the hill she went sobbing and wailing, but ne'er a foothold could she find. At last she came to a smithy, and the smith promised, if she would serve him faithfully for 7 years and 7 days, that he would make her iron shoon wherewith to climb the hill of glass. So for 7 long years and 7 short days she toiled, and span, and swept, and washed in the smith's house. And for wage he gave her a pair of iron shoon, and with them she clomb the glassy hill and went on her way. Now she had not gone far before a company of fine lords and ladies rode past her, talking of all the grand doings that were to be done at the young Duke of Norway's wedding. Then she passed a number of people carrying all sorts of good things, which they told her were for the Duke's wedding. And at last she came to a palace castle, where the courtyards were full of cooks and bakers, some running this way, some running that, and all so busy that they did not know what to do first. Then she heard the horns of hunters and cries of "Room! Room for the Duke of Norway and his bride!" And who should ride past but the beautiful prince she had but half unspelled, and by his side was the witch-woman, who was determined to marry him that very day. Well, at the sight she felt that her heart was indeed like to break, and over again was like to break, so that the time had come for her to crack one of the nuts. So she broke the walnut, as it was the biggest, and out of it came a wonderful wee woman carding wool as fast as ever she could card. Now when the witch-woman saw this wonderful thing, she offered the girl her choice of anything in the castle for it. "If you will put off your wedding with the Duke for a day, and let me watch in his room to-night," said the girl, "you shall have it." Now, like all witch-women, the bride wanted everything her own way, and she was so sure she had her groom safe that she consented. But before the Duke went to rest she gave him, with her own hands, a posset so made that anyone who drank it would sleep till morning. Thus, though the girl was allowed alone into the Duke's chamber, and though she spent the livelong night sighing and singing, "Far have I sought for thee, long have I wrought for thee, near am I brought to thee, dear Duke of Norway, wilt thou say naught to me?" the Duke never wakened, but slept on. So when day came, the girl had to leave him without his ever knowing she had been there. Then once again her heart was like to break, and over again like to break, and she cracked the filbert nut because it was the next biggest, and out of it came a wonderful wee woman spinning away as fast as ever she could spin. Now when the witch-bride saw this wonderful thing, she once again put off her wedding so that she might possess it, and once again the girl spent the livelong night in the Duke's chamber sighing and singing, "Far have I sought for thee, long have I wrought for thee, near am I brought to thee, dear Duke of Norway, wilt thou say naught to me?" But the Duke, who had drunk the sleeping draught from the hands of his witch bride, never stirred, and when dawn came, the girl had to leave him without his ever knowing she had been there. Then indeed the girl's heart was like to break, and over again like to break. So she cracked the last nut, the hazelnut, and out of it came the most wonderful weeest woman, reeling away at yarn as fast as she could reel. And this marvel so delighted the witch bride that at once again she consented to put off her wedding for a day, and allow the girl to watch in the Duke's chamber the night through, in order to possess it. Now it so happened that when the Duke was dressing that morning, he heard his pages talking amongst themselves of the strange sighing and singing they had heard in the night, and he said to his faithful old valet, "What do the pages mean?" And the old valet, who hated the witch bride, said, "If the master will take no sleeping draught to-night, mayhap he may also hear what for 2 nights has kept me awake." At this the Duke marvelled greatly, and when the witch bride brought him his evening posset, he made excuse it was not sweet enough, and while she went away to get honey to sweeten it withal, he poured away the posset and made believe he had swallowed it. So that night, when dark had come, and the girl stole into his chamber with a heavy heart, thinking it would be the very last time she would ever see him, the Duke was really broad awake, and when she sate down by his bedside and began to sing, "Far have I sought for thee," he knew her voice at once and clasped her in his arms. Then he told her how he had been in the power of the witch woman, and had forgotten everything, but that now he remembered all, and that the spell was broken for ever and aye. So the wedding feast served for their marriage, since the witch bride, seeing her power was gone, quickly fled the country, and was never heard of again. End of The Black Bull of Norway, Chapter 16.